Hello, everyone. This is Tom Brew, your publisher at Indiana Hoosiers on SI. And welcome back to year 4 of the Hoosier Roundtable. We're getting ready to start the 2024-25 academic season, and hard to believe it's already here, but here it is, and we're ready to go. We got a football game now just a handful of weeks away, so thought it was a great time to kick off the very first episode of the Hoosier Roundtable and get it rolling. And we've got a great team as usual on our Indiana Hoosiers on Sports Illustrated group. Jack Ankony is back for his third year with us, and we're very, very happy now to have Todd Golden join our team as well too. Todd's been around Indiana for a long, long time, and he's been around the IU beat for the last couple of years too. So it was a huge get as far as I'm concerned for him to be able to join our team. So Jack and Todd, welcome to another season of Indiana sports, and thrilled to have you both as part of the team.
Well, thanks for having me on the team. I'm proud to be a part of it. Looking forward to this. Will be sort of year 3 for me coming back to the Indiana beat after many years at Indiana State. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to get it rolling. Should be a lot of good storylines to talk about this time of the year with football right around the corner, and kind of basketball will be here as sooner than we know it. So
it's always the case when it comes to Indiana basketball too. It is always, it seems, right around the corner. Well, and today, we're going to talk a good bit of football too. Obviously, we're just season openers on August 31st. That is, literally less than 3 weeks away now. So we'll certainly get our fill of football in for sure. But we're going to talk some basketball as well, and just Indiana. So that always has to be the case. But let's start out with football first. You guys have both been able to be out of practice here since basically the first of the month to get things rolling. And and obviously it's a new era of Indiana football. Tom Allen's time in Indiana is gone. Curt Cignetti was hired from James Madison at the first, right before the first of the year, and he's come in with a lot of fanfare and a new program, new coaches, new coaching staff, and a whole bunch of new players. So, Jack, let's start out with you. My first question, for you is, with all the new faces on this roster, and and the Indiana fan base just sort of starving for something better after a few really bad years, what's it going to take for the fans to kind of get to know all these people quickly? Because there certainly seems to be a lot of fresh faces out there, and maybe you can fill us in a little bit too on how, and some of those fresh faces we could look forward to seeing.
Yeah, well, I think to start on the offensive side of the ball, the quarterback spot obviously being very important. They brought in Curtis Rourke from Ohio, and pretty much all signs are pointing to him being the starter. Curt Cignetti he said he isn't going to announce it publicly, but when we talked to him on Monday, he said that Rourke has pretty significantly separated himself after the team's first scrimmage, which was this past Saturday. And he comes to Indiana after being a multi-year starter at Ohio. I think he was a second-team All-MAC quarterback last year. Pretty big guy, real tall. He's not, he's definitely more of the stereotypical, I guess, pocket passer, as you could call it, but he looks pretty nimble. He's not, he's not going to, I don't anticipate him doing a ton of designed runs, but he certainly doesn't look immobile back there. And I think a combo to look with him is Elijah Surratt, one of 13 James Madison transfers. I expect him to be one of Indiana's better wide receivers. He was, I think, 11th in receiving yards in the nation last season. So I think that's kind of a newcomer combo that fans can get really excited about. Surratt's been pretty impressive at practice. And then I guess in terms of the running game, I don't expect them to really lean on one guy in particular, but they brought in, I think, 2 guys from James Madison, Justice Ellison from Wake Forest, Elijah Green from North Carolina. So I expect that to kind of be a by-committee group, mixing a lot of new faces. They don't return literally anyone from last year's running back room, which is pretty unique. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they got to replace Aaron Casey, who, team captain, first-team All-Big Ten guy last year. And it's looking like 2 James Madison guys, Aiden Fisher and Jalen Walker, who started next to each other last season at James Madison. And then another JMU guy, Mikhail Kamara, has drawn a lot of praise. He's kind of a defensive end edge rusher type of guy, whatever you want to call it. Carter Smith, I use left tackle, talked about, I hate going up against him in practice, was kind of a funny quote the other day. So I expect him and James Carpenter, again, another JMU guy, to be kind of the top guys on the defensive line, among others. And then D'Angelo Pons, he might have been one of the biggest additions on either side of the ball. A freshman All-American last season at cornerback. Donovan McCulley pointed him out today as someone that, is really challenging him to get better. So, there's new faces all throughout the roster. It's going to take some time. I feel like during fall camp, I spent the first few practices just trying to put numbers to names and get a feel for the roster. But, those are some newcomers that I'm sort of expecting to have the biggest impact on this team. And there's a handful of others, I could mention more, but, those are kind of have been the standouts to me.
Sure, I get that completely. Anytime we have a first-year coach, it's I think the automatic thing is for people to get excited just because of change, and certainly though Tom Allen did have a few good years in Indiana, it certainly got really bad at the end, and I think any sort of fresh face would be well received. But Todd, the way Curt has rolled into town from day one, he has been very adamant about how this is going to be a new Indiana football program. It's going to be nothing like it was before. He's talked with a lot of bravado and a lot of confidence, and the fan base is eating that up. But obviously, when we get close to games now, it's going to be kind of put up or shut up time too. But how he's rolled into town and how he's embraced being the head coach at Indiana is certainly a dramatic difference from what we're used to, isn't it?
Yeah, no question. I mean, if you had to grade his offseason in terms of public perception, you'd give him an A because he has people talking about Indiana football. He has people excited about Indiana football. And he's been very open about acknowledging that this was always part of his plan. He was going to come out throwing punches, whether his opponents are keeping the receipts of that, we'll see. But it's a smart way to get some attention. It's also part of the history of coaching changes at Indiana. It's and at a lot of schools. I mean, there's always usually some sort of change in tone from the previous coach. And Tom Allen was, very much, I think, liked by the fan base because of how nice of a guy he was. But, the change in tone is more brash, more arrogant, if you want to call it that, from Cignetti. But he's also been pretty smart about acknowledging that it was part of the game of getting people's attention on Indiana football. Since then, and he acknowledged this a little bit at Big Ten Media Days, and certainly his demeanor once fall camp began has been this way. He's gone back to more of a business-like tone. His press conferences with us so far through fall camp have been very business-like, no crazy statements, no anything like that. It's been all about the football. So he understands that, talk is cheap ultimately, and it's the results that are going to matter. And he's extremely confident in his ability to bring those results to the table. And his track record, gives him reason to be confident. He's won everywhere he's been. So I know the fans have kind of focused in on some of the, things he said, but he's got the chops as a football coach. And so far, we're not seeing what I haven't seen so far that would be concerning is that if he would have come out and you kind of distrusted his football acumen and he was kind of leaning on vibes a little bit and stuff like that. We haven't really had that. It's been all football all the time. And I think that's a good sign that he knows when to turn it on and when to turn it off.
Yep, absolutely. And we've been thoroughly enjoying your series that you started this week, Todd, that kind of looks back at first-year coaches at Indiana, going all the way back to the Bo McMillan days. It's been a great history lesson for fans. And, I'm sure you learned a lot, too, while you've been writing this. But tell me a little bit about some of the guys you've highlighted a little bit and what some of the things that they've been through and what you've learned might apply to what Curt Cignetti's first year might be at Indiana.
Yeah, well, I mean, every coach who comes in is optimistic about what they bring to the table, what is different from the previous guy. So that's something that all of the coaches have in common. But yeah, I've learned a lot. I mean, Indiana's football history, obviously Indiana's basketball history is well chronicled. Indiana's football history isn't as much. So for me, it was as much about learning about the background of Indiana football as it is for the readers of the stories. And there's some fascinating coaches in there, some of them before our times. I mean, we're starting now to get to the part of the series where coaches are within the collective memory of most people around. But, the Phil Dickens weirdness in the late 50s, if people don't know, Phil Dickens was hired out of Wyoming in 1957. The Big Ten instituted new recruiting rules that year, which seem quaint in hindsight. They scholarships at that time were based on need. So if you were from a well-off family, you weren't going to get much of a scholarship back in the late 50s in the Big Ten. The Big Ten, as they want to do, were very diligent about protecting those rules. Dickens fell afoul of those rules before he coached a game, and he was suspended for the season by the Big Ten in his first season. So Bob Hicks, who was one of his assistants, actually coached the 1957 season. Dickens' debut didn't actually occur until 1958. So stories like that, people who were around back then would probably remember them, but they're not necessarily well known to the fans at large. That was fascinating to learn about that stuff and how, it's been a saga since the 1940s to get Indiana football on winning footing. And no coach since Bo McMillan has left Indiana with a winning record. So Curt Cignetti is fighting that history. I don't know how aware of it he is or how much he cares, but we know, being around Indiana, that that's just part of the collective issue that Indiana football has had. Whether they've had some good years mixed in there or not, it's been hard to sustain it. So that's learning about these coaches and how they ultimately ended up is a good way of kind of understanding the challenge that Curt has to get football to where Indiana wants it to be.
Certainly know that to be true. It's I remember when Tom Allen in 2019 went 8-4 and then 6-1 the following year and came within 7 points of basically finishing undefeated in the Big Ten. It was like, those 2 years back to back, were the two best, best records ever in the history of Indiana football, which is saying a lot, and then obviously fell on very hard times, in 21, 22 and 23, and now he's gone, defensive coordinator at Penn State. But it definitely has changed a lot. So certainly, I think everybody's really excited to just sort of see what it's going to be like. And Jack, I know you've had a chance to talk to a lot of the players and such since all this stuff really from the spring. What about some of the guys who are back? What have they been talking about in regards to what the changes are like and what to look forward to, from them? I know we've got a few names that we still recognize and remember.
Yeah, well, I think that the one guy that IU fans will remember fondly from last season, Donovan McCulley, the big wide receiver. We talked to him after practice today, Wednesday, actually, and him and Omar Cooper, who's returning too. He didn't play as much as McCulley last season, but they both had some pretty interesting comments about how, Cignetti and his staff are kind of, not afraid to, show him some tough love and really push him to play harder and, in their preparation and things like that. And, Cignetti kind of called out McCulley during spring practice about we need him to be an everyday guy and, he needs to, play hard, play in and play out. And, Omar kind of said today, I see Donovan at his best when he's kind of playing angry and when he's motivated and things like that. And I think that's something that, some of the coaches are bringing out. That's maybe a change from last staff, at least that's what, Omar pointed out as kind of a change today. So those are two pretty key returners. And I think on the offensive line, one of the most important roster retention moves that they had in the offseason was Carter Smith, who started all 12 games at left tackle last season, really in his first opportunity to play. He's entering now his third year with Indiana and is going to be a really important piece. Obviously, left tackle is one of the most important spots, on the team in general. And then I guess on the defensive side, I would say that I'm excited to see what Jacob Mangum-Farrar brings this season. He played linebacker alongside Aaron Casey last year, but he's actually moving to what Indiana calls the stud position, which is basically just sort of a more specific name for like a defensive end or edge rusher. He's bulked up a little bit, but I think he kind of brings an interesting skill set, just being, I guess, a little bit quicker as a previous linebacker, and now he's mostly going to be focused on rushing the passer. So there aren't many returners. I mean, Jameer Johnson at cornerback and Jamari Sharp, I think, are two guys to look at behind Pons. It's a very new team, but those would be some guys that I would definitely look at in terms of the returning Hoosiers.
So cameras are rolling, guys. So last football-related topic is, even though it's mid-August, let's talk a little bit about predictions and what you think this season would be like. We've seen a lot of the preseason polls, out of Big Ten media days and stuff that have Indiana sort of in that bottom quadrant of 15th, 16th, 17th out of the new Big Ten, 18-team Big Ten league. So Jack or Todd, let's start with you. Tell me what you think this team might do during their 12-game regular season schedule, and give me a win-loss total and maybe some surprises that you might see along the way, and obviously depending on what your total might be as to whether or not this could be a bowl team or not.
Well, I'm on record. I wrote over last weekend that I think Indiana can win 7 games this season. And it's not that I necessarily feel like they're a 7-win team qualitatively. I think their schedule helps them quite a bit. They only play 2 ranked teams inside the Big Ten among the teams predicted to be in the bottom 5. They being one of them. They play all the other 4, and they only play 2 of the top 5, Ohio State and Michigan. So the schedule is set up for success. Their non-conference schedule, which includes Florida International, Western Illinois, and Charlotte, I mean, they better run that table. That makes them 3-0, and I think they can win 4 Big Ten games. Their home schedule, they play 8 home games total this season. There's games at home against Maryland. I think that's winnable. They play Purdue at home. That's winnable. They play Washington at home, which wouldn't seem to be winnable on the surface, but the team that Washington took to the national championship game last year is gone. I mean, there's basically nobody left from that team. So you don't know what you're getting with the Huskies necessarily. And so I have to count that one as a potential win. I think they could beat UCLA away. UCLA is rebuilding, and Indiana will be playing their 3rd game as opposed to UCLA playing their 2nd. I think that's a big deal. So right there, that gets you to 4 Big Ten wins, plus the 3 non-conference wins gets you to 7. Now, I think they're capable of winning a couple others as well. I mean, I didn't count Michigan State and Northwestern, which are both road games, as wins, but they're certainly winnable. Nebraska comes here. Nebraska's supposedly going to be better this year, but that's certainly a winnable game too. So the schedule sets up for success this year. And I think a bowl season is definitely, it should absolutely be the goal for this team. Curt Cignetti, of course, says that he doesn't put any goals on a team. He doesn't want to limit their potential. I think he's right this year, though. I'm kind of more bullish on Indiana than the outside observers are, which, I don't blame them for picking Indiana where they did. There's a lot of unknowns to the outside observers in the Big Ten, but I honestly think they can win 7 games, and I think that should be the baseline of what they can be this season.
Yeah, and certainly with best case scenario, I don't know, I counted 10 wins there, Todd. If
could be
scenario. So it's
best case scenario, absolutely
going to be interesting. Well, Jack, Todd seems to be bullish on this team. Where do you stand in mid-August as to what you think this team might be able to do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the same page with a lot of what Todd just said. I think another point about the schedule is, the way it's laid out with you don't play Michigan and Ohio State until November. I mean, I think back to the last few Tom Allen seasons, and, last year they opened up with Ohio State. 2021, they opened up at Iowa. Indiana doesn't have a game like that until deep into the schedule. They open Florida International, Western Illinois, at UCLA is winnable, as Todd mentioned. Charlotte, Maryland's got a new quarterback, and, they haven't necessarily been world beaters the last few years. So I think that's a really important aspect of the schedule in terms of they have a chance to rack up some wins against lesser competition early in the season and build some confidence and kind of figure out what they have. So, I mean, I think 7 wins is kind of what I would predict if I had to make a prediction right now. I think 5 is like the absolute floor. Just because, and another thing, they don't play Louisville or Cincinnati like they did the last few seasons under Tom Allen, which, really hurt. They play 3 non-conference teams now that they really should beat up on. So if I had to go on record with a prediction, I think 7 is pretty realistic. Like Todd said, 8 home games. Allen he had 6 or 7 most seasons. Obviously not the COVID year, but 8 home games is a very unique aspect. I think they got the 2 weakest Pac-12 teams coming along in terms of UCLA and Washington. I think Oregon is, they're in talks about maybe winning the Big Ten. I think USC is better than UCLA and Washington too. So I think Indiana got a really favorable draw. And, we'll see. I mean, the news about the O-lineman, Nick Kidwell, getting hurt kind of made me more concerned about how their offensive line is, because that has kind of been a weakness the last few seasons, although it improved last year. But yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Todd said, and I think 7 is pretty reasonable.
Well, since I am letting the 2 of you cover this football team this year while I prepare for basketball and deal with some other business things, I am going to avoid making a prediction myself. So being the coward and chicken that I am sometimes, mostly because I'll be honest, I really feel like I need to see this team play. Like I don't know what they're going to look like on either side of the ball. I don't know how they're going to play. Obviously, last year when all this was going on with the hiring, went back and watched 3 or 4 James Madison games, and I loved the style of play. And obviously brings, I think you said 13 JMU guys with him. It will be interesting to see, but I don't know what I'm going to see, and so certainly that non-conference schedule helps. Where man, if they lose any of those 3 games, it's going to be a disaster. But I think they will win all 3 of those. And I like that the UCLA game is in there early, because I think it's a road trip for one. It's UCLA, but it's still a Big Ten game. It's a conference game, and I think that will be a good challenge. So I'm in sort of wait and see mode as to how good this team can be, but I think it'll give us plenty of opportunities early to show what they got. So I'm really looking forward to watching them play. I can certainly say that as well. So it's excited to see it. August 31st home opener, and we'll all be there and look forward to it. All right. Well, we got about 8 minutes left, so let's switch over and talk a little bit of basketball. We've been getting some stuff out there. We're starting. Obviously, we've seen the full non-conference schedule now, and Jack, you had a chance to write a little bit about Trey Galloway yesterday, the guard who hurt his knee at the end of the year and got he was part of Miller Kopp's new podcast that they started, and it was really sort of the good first thorough update that we got from Trey about how he's feeling. So we just kind of, if anybody didn't see your story on Sports Illustrated Indiana, it's linked to the story here with the podcast. But fill everybody in a little bit about what's the latest on Trey.
Yeah, so Trey, he pretty much said, he wasn't able to participate in a lot of the offseason stuff, which was expected even when we talked to him after right after that Big Ten tournament game. And his quote was, I 100% believe I'll be back to my normal self if I just keep doing the right things, So I think, it sounds like he'll be ready to go for the start of the year. Obviously, like that, there's still some time before, and if he's not even on the court during the summer, he's got some progress to make. But I think he's on the right track to get back ready for the season, which is big because, I see him as kind of a, someone who can kind of, lead the transition from, they have so many new players similar to the football team, a bunch of transfers, and see him as a guy to kind of, establish the culture and say, this is what we do here. And, he might have a bit of a different role this upcoming season, which we could get into. But, I think a positive update in terms of his injury recovery and, where he'll be come, I guess, late October.
Yep, certainly. It helps that it's only mid-August and he's on the right path, at least for recovery. Hopefully, when they get after it for good in a month or 6 weeks or so, he's able to work his way back in there. But certainly, and Todd, I'd love to have you talk about this a bit more. This is really the first time in the Mike Woodson era that Indiana's roster of guards, I think, is really good from top to bottom. I don't think there's any question this is the best collection of guards that he's had on any of his 4 teams. The 2 transfers are huge. The Trey coming back healthy would be huge. Even Gabe Cupps, the second year, just growing up a lot would be huge. And I think they also have wing guys, that can be 2s or 3s and stuff like that, depending on how they want to match up. I think basically when we sort of talk about the perimeter, that with all the new additions and the new faces, I think they're going to be better there. And Todd, I'm sure you're really looking forward to seeing what all these new faces bring to the table.
Yeah, I'm curious about how Mike Woodson is going to mesh his style of coaching to what they have in the backcourt. Because you're right, for the first time, certainly since I've been around Indiana basketball, they have options. That was the biggest thing that held that team back last year is they just had no options. People said they should shoot more. Well, who's going to do the shooting? They didn't have a shooter on that team. I think this year they're a little bit more versatile. I also think players like Mackenzie Mbako, who isn't necessarily a guard, but he can spread out. His improvement from the 3-point line as the season went along last year is definitely going to take some pressure off the guards and just help Indiana's shooting in general. I'm curious to see what Gabe Cupps can do in terms of bulking up a little bit, but also, 1 year older, 1 year wiser, running the show. He did a good job with it last year. Very good defender. And then Trey Galloway kind of, I almost look at him as like the guy who can smooth things out where there might be trouble. If they need somebody to handle the rock for a few possessions, he can do it. If they need him to drive the lane, he can do it. If they need him to play off the ball, he can do it. So, he is kind of the jack of all trades, and that should help whether, if somebody gets into foul trouble or something of that nature. So curious to see what Rice and Carlisle can do. But they have options, and that's the biggest thing. And that's something that they just haven't had. Their roster just wasn't balanced correctly last year. And hopefully this year it is. And that's what they're counting on. And maybe too, some of the players like Galloway, for example, can get back to form in terms of things like shooting. Trey fell way off in 3-point shooting last year. Maybe he gets a little bit of that back since he, might have a more, I just said he can do a bunch of things, but he may have a more of a defined role from game to game. So that'll be interesting to see. And, just to see how Mike Woodson can, put the puzzle pieces together and try to get Indiana moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm certainly very excited to see all these new pieces because, Rice and Carlisle were very, very good players, on the college level a year ago, and certainly had better seasons than any Indiana guards on the 23-24 team. So, I firmly believe that those two are going to come in and have prominent roles and play a lot. And then, I personally think Mbako, I think he showed a lot at the end, but I also think he learned that another year in college is going to help him a lot, to sort of develop, because I think he's a very good 3-point shooter. His numbers, rose dramatically near the end of the year. I've heard from summer workouts that he's a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger and knocking down shots left and right. I won't be a bit surprised if Mackenzie Mbako is the leading scorer on this team this year. And then I think they will play differently. I'll be curious to see. Obviously, bringing in Ballo from Arizona, 2-time first-team All-Pac-10 center. He's a man in the middle. And every Mike Woodson team so far has had that. But I think sometimes he's been criticized unfairly for relying on perimeter players that much or post players that much. But I've always been a big believer in that if you get the ball to your best player, and that was certainly Trace Jackson Davis those first couple of years, and Khalil Ware was, I thought, really good last year near the end, and so we'll see. But I also think with the newcomers and Mbako that when they want to play small, I think we're going to see this team run a lot more. I hope that's the case, and so I think that's why I can't wait to watch them play, and we got to wait a few months for that. But it seems like we're in a position where when we all left Indiana basketball in March, we had thought basically that this program had imploded. We were wondering if there were going to even be any people left on the roster, and they went out and Trey and Anthony Leal, said they were going to stay on senior day, and Baco and Malik Renew decided right away that they were coming back, and then, get a 5-star recruit and then a handful of huge transfers, including Luke Goody that we didn't even mention. I think he's going to be huge for this team too. It's just like, it's going to be a lot of fun. So obviously we've got some football to get through, but Jack, I'm sure you're looking forward to basketball season rolling around as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. And, Tom, you mentioned Goody, and I think an important part of this year's team is just the depth that they didn't have last season. It felt like there were a lot of games where if a guy got in foul trouble or if Woodson had to go to the bench, which we know he likes kind of using his bench, but last year it felt like a lot of times he couldn't. And, this season, if you're able to bring one of Galloway or Carlisle off the bench and then plus Luke Goody, we haven't even mentioned Bryson Tucker, who was a, top 20-ish freshman coming in, considered a 5-star by some people. I think their bench unit is going to be much stronger than it was the last few seasons, which helps kind of once you get into the grind of the Big Ten season. I think, Todd pointed out last season, the 3-point shooting, some people wanted them to shoot more, but they didn't really have the guys. I think they have a few more capable shooters than they did last season. And then, the combination of Renew and Ballo inside, I think, some people have criticized Woodson for kind of relying on the bigs, but I think that will be less of an issue this season when you have the perimeter players that can add to the talent you have inside. I think it's going to be a good season for IU. I think they're pretty safely, looking at the Big Ten, like in the top 5 of the Big Ten with potential to be even higher. We'll just see how Woodson is able to put it all together, with so many new guys.
Todd, wrap it up for us, bud.
Well, I feel like they also have they've set up the schedule to be favorable too. I mean, in a sense, in the sense that there's wins on that schedule. They need to take care of business at Battle for Atlantis. That's going to be crucial because the downside of having a schedule where you have wins is that you don't have a great strength of schedule. So they need to do well down in the Bahamas. They need to get a favorable draw, which one of these days we'll actually see it. But, I think that's a big part of it. And then, how much, how different is Woodson going to be in terms of, what he does with the depth? I don't think we really know that yet, what he actually has in mind in terms of how he handles the rotation, which he took some criticism for last year. So, in that sense, I'm in wait and see mode with this team, but certainly the talent is there to be certainly better than they were last year, if not, perhaps the best team that Woodson has had. We'll see. But yeah, I think it's at least this year, as opposed to last year, I think some of the criticism came in too late last year. It was like, well, why can't we shoot? Well, the criticism for that should have happened before the season started when it was pretty apparent they didn't have any shooters. Once the season did begin, I think the fact that they were relying on the post was because, as you mentioned, Tom, their best player was in the post. So this year, that's a little different. He has a little bit more of a dynamic roster, and I'm hopeful that he can take that and win with it because, we're getting to the point now where he kind of has to. The end of last year was pretty ugly in terms of fan reaction and sometimes Mike's own reaction to it. So there is a little bit of pressure to win, I think. But I think he's put together a roster that can do it. And one thing Woodson has done a great job of is he's taken advantage of the resources that Indiana has in the NIL era. And he's, made it clear that, we're one of the big dogs. We got the money to be the big dogs. So why shouldn't we be a big dog? So I think he's done a very good job of that. And it's why he was able to rebuild that roster in pretty quick order. But now he's got to do something with it. So we'll see if he does.
Yep, absolutely. I think the point you make about the NIL stuff is huge because I think, from a transfer standpoint, they did the best job of anybody in the country in regards to bringing in that amount of talent especially in a case where they were at, where they really needed every single one of those bodies to be competitive, and I think they are. So I agree with you 100% on that. That's Indiana in an NIL marketplace should always be competitive, and I think this year's transfer window sort of opened all of that up. I think now all of that's going to be in place forever going forward, and I think it'll help with their recruiting, both high school kids and transfers going forward all the time too. So, guys, I appreciate getting back at it here on the Hoosier Roundtable, episode 1, and the plan obviously is to do this all the way through April for sure, and we'll get it rolling, and we'll have some other improvements to the show as well. But it's great having both of you guys on part of the team, and it's always great kicking stuff around. So thanks for being part of the Hoosier Roundtable, and we'll see you all next week.
Fantastic. Thanks for everybody who's watching and listening. We really appreciate it.
Yep, for sure. Excited to get the seasons going.
All right, guys. We'll see you soon, and keep up all the great work. Everybody can read it all at our Indiana Hoosiers on Sports Illustrated site. It's easy to find, si.com/college/Indiana. Takes you all right there. Everything is free, no paywall, no subscription, no nothing. And a lot of great content from all three of us, and much more to come throughout the year. You can follow all three of us on Twitter as well. Just if you're searching for Tom Brew, Todd Golden, or Jack Ankony, we're all easy to find there. We post all of our stories there to Twitter as well. And then we also have our Indiana Hoosiers on Sports Illustrated Facebook page, where we post every story there as well too. And have a great group of more than 13,000 Indiana fans on that site now, with a lot of great comment and interaction. So if you're a Facebook fan, definitely like that page and enjoy and be part of the conversation. So thanks for being part of Hoosier Roundtable Year 4. It started way back when at Yogi's in 2021 with the Mike and Micah show with Michael Penix Jr. and Micah McFadden, and look at them now, both millionaires in the NFL doing great work. And so we're excited to do more of that, and we'll hopefully try to get out and about throughout the season too. So thanks for being part of the show, and we'll see you next week.